July 1863. New York City, burned like hell itself, had opened its gates. General William Tecumseh Sherman stood on a rooftop watching smoke rise from a dozen buildings. The draft riots had turned America's largest city into a war zone. Poor immigrants attacked rich men's homes. Mobs lynched innocent black citizens. The police couldn't stop the violence. Sherman had seen battlefields across the South. He'd witnessed the horror of Shiloh and Vicksburg. But this was different. This was American citizens destroying their own city because they refused to fight for the Union. President Lincoln sent Sherman north with a secret mission: stop the riots before Confederate spies turned the chaos into a full rebellion. New York's fall would mean the Union's defeat. "General, we've lost control of 5 Points," reported Captain Hayes, his aide. "The gangs rule the streets now. Our soldiers can't enter without being slaughtered." Sherman pulled out his cigar, studying the burning skyline. He'd fought rebels in the field. Now he needed to fight them in alleys and tenements. Traditional military tactics wouldn't work here. "Who runs 5 Points?" Sherman asked. "A man named William Poole. They call him Bill the Boss. He controls every gang, every criminal, every dirty corner of that hellhole." Sherman smiled grimly. "Then get me a meeting with Bill the Boss." 5 Points was New York's darkest neighborhood. Immigrants packed into crumbling buildings. Crime flourished in every shadow. The police only entered in large groups, and even then, they rarely left unharmed. Sherman dressed in civilian clothes, hiding his military identity. He walked through muddy streets filled with angry rioters. Buildings burned around him. Looters smashed windows and dragged goods into the chaos. Captain Hayes accompanied him, both men armed but trying to appear harmless. They needed to reach the old brewery, a massive tenement building where Bill the Boss reportedly held court. "General, this is insane," Hayes whispered. "If they discover who you are, we're dead." "Then we better not let them discover it," Sherman replied calmly. A gang of 20 men blocked their path. Rough-looking Irish immigrants carrying clubs and knives. Their leader, a scarred man missing 2 fingers, stepped forward. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Men looking for Bill the Boss," Sherman answered. "We have a business proposition." The scarred man laughed. "Everyone's got business with Bill today. But Bill don't meet with nobody who ain't been vouched for. So unless you got a name I recognize, turn around before I crack your skull." Sherman didn't flinch. "Tell Bill that General Sherman wants to discuss how we can both get what we want from this riot." The scarred man's expression changed from amusement to shock. "You're Sherman? The Union general?" "That's right. Now take me to your boss, or I'll assume he's too afraid to meet me." 20 minutes later, Sherman sat in a surprisingly well-furnished room inside the old brewery. Bill the Boss was not what he expected. The gang leader was a tall, intelligent-looking man in his 40s, dressed better than most businessmen. He spoke with education, not the rough accent Sherman anticipated. "General Sherman," Bill greeted him, pouring whiskey. "You're either the bravest man in New York or the most foolish. My men could kill you right now, and nobody would ever find your body." "But you won't," Sherman replied, accepting the drink. "Because you're smart enough to know this riot is bad for business." Bill laughed genuinely. "You understand more than most generals. Yes, riots are terrible for business. My operations depend on order, routine, predictability. Chaos means I can't collect debts, can't run my gambling houses, can't move goods through the docks." Sherman leaned forward. "Then help me stop it." "Why would I help the Union? The draft takes my men, forces them to fight a war for rich people who've never suffered a day in their lives. Because if this riot continues, the Confederacy wins. And if the Confederacy wins, slavery expands north. Your Irish immigrants will compete with freed slaves for jobs, driving wages down even further." Bill the Boss considered Sherman's words carefully. He walked to his window, looking down at the burning streets. His empire was crumbling because poor people had no outlet for their rage except violence. "What exactly are you proposing, General?" Sherman laid out his plan. "You control 5 Points. Your gangs could stop this riot in hours if you wanted. You know who the ringleaders are, where they hide, how they organize. Help me end this peacefully, and I'll ensure Lincoln addresses the draft inequality." "Lincoln's promises mean nothing to people here," Bill countered. "They've heard politicians lie for generations." "Then what do you want?" Sherman asked directly. Bill smiled. This was a man who understood negotiation. Amnesty for my men who've already rioted, jobs for 5 Points residents in government contracts after the war. And most importantly, I want wealthy New Yorkers to pay commutation fees that fund community improvements here, not just buy their sons out of service. Sherman calculated quickly. These terms were reasonable, possibly even helpful for the Union cause. "I can arrange that. But I need something else from you. Information about Confederate agents operating in the city." Bill's smile widened. "Ah, now we get to the real reason you're here. Yes, there are Confederate spies in New York. They're funding the riots, providing weapons, encouraging the violence. I know exactly who they are." Bill the boss pulled out a detailed map of New York City, marking locations with red ink. "The Confederates have been planning this for months. They have agents embedded in immigrant communities, spreading lies about the draft and the war." Sherman studied the map intensely. "How deep does this go?" "Deeper than you imagine, General. They've infiltrated police departments, political organizations, even some Union supply chains. The goal isn't just riots, it's complete destruction of New York's ability to support the war effort." Bill pointed to specific locations. "They're planning to burn draft offices, military warehouses, and eventually the harbor itself. If they succeed, the Union loses its primary port for moving troops and supplies." Sherman felt cold fury rising. This wasn't just a riot. It was a sophisticated military operation disguised as civil unrest. "Why are you telling me this?" Sherman asked suspiciously. "You could use this chaos to expand your criminal empire." Bill met his eyes steadily. "Because I'm an American, General. I might be a criminal, but I'm not a traitor. My parents fled Ireland's oppression to find freedom here. I won't let the Confederacy turn this country into something worse than what my family escaped." Sherman extended his hand. "Then we have an alliance, Mr. Poole. Unlikely as it is." Bill shook it firmly. "The most shocking alliance in American history. A Union general and a gang boss saving New York together." They worked through the night, combining military strategy with street knowledge. Sherman brought tactical experience from battlefields. Bill contributed detailed intelligence about gang structures, criminal networks, and the hidden movements of 5 Points. "The main Confederate agent calls himself Colonel Harris," Bill explained. "He's not a real colonel, just a Southern aristocrat playing soldier. He's staying at the Metropolitan Hotel under a false identity." Sherman made notes rapidly. "How many men does he have?" "About 50 trained operatives, plus hundreds of rioters he's manipulated into violence. Harris is smart. He never shows his face directly. He uses intermediaries, pays in gold, and disappears before anyone connects him to the attacks." Captain Hayes studied the intelligence. "This is incredible detail, Mr. Poole. How did you gather all this?" Bill smiled. "General, I know everything that happens in this city. Information is my real business. Criminals talk, and they talk to me. Confederate agents need safe houses, weapons, transportation, all things that flow through networks I control or monitor." Sherman saw the brilliance of this alliance. The Union Army had strength, but lacked street-level intelligence. Bill had information, but lacked military power. Together, they could accomplish what neither could alone. "Here's what we do," Sherman outlined. "Tomorrow morning, your gangs spread word that the riot is over. Anyone continuing violence faces your wrath, not just the Army's." Dawn broke over a burning New York. Bill the boss sent his most trusted lieutenants through 5 Points, carrying a simple message: the riot ends today, or Bill's protection ends for anyone who continues fighting. In the criminal underworld, Bill's word was law. Gangs that ignored his orders found themselves isolated, vulnerable, and eventually destroyed. Everyone knew crossing Bill the boss meant death. Meanwhile, Sherman positioned his troops strategically. Instead of confronting rioters directly, soldiers protected key infrastructure: draft offices, military warehouses, and transportation hubs. The visible military presence signaled strength without provoking more violence. By noon, the riot's energy began dissipating. Word spread through immigrant communities that Bill the Boss had allied with the Union general to end the violence. People trusted Bill more than politicians or generals. If Bill said the riot was over, it was over. But Colonel Harris, the Confederate agent, wasn't finished. He'd invested too much money and effort to accept defeat so easily. "The gang boss has betrayed us," Harris told his operatives in a secret meeting. "We kill Bill the Boss tonight. Without him, the riots will resume and New York will burn completely." One of Bill's spies attended that meeting. Within an hour, Sherman and Bill knew about the assassination plot. "They're coming for you," Sherman warned. "We need to move you somewhere safe." Bill refused. "I don't hide, General. Let them come. We'll be ready." Sherman and Bill transformed the old brewery into a fortress. Union soldiers in civilian clothes positioned themselves throughout the building. Bill's gang members prepared weapons and barricaded entrances. They created a trap within a trap, appearing vulnerable while actually being heavily defended. "Colonel Harris will send his best killers," Bill predicted. "Southern gentlemen who believe they're superior to Northern criminals. Their arrogance is their weakness." Sherman positioned sharpshooters on rooftops surrounding the old brewery. Captain Hayes commanded a hidden reserve force ready to cut off any escape routes. Every detail was planned with military precision combined with criminal cunning. Night fell. The streets grew quiet as New Yorkers stayed indoors, sensing something terrible was about to happen. At midnight, Harris's assassins arrived. 20 men, all experienced killers from the South, approached the old brewery from multiple directions. They carried modern weapons and moved with military training. "They're better than I expected," Sherman observed from his hidden position. "But they don't know these streets like we do," Bill replied confidently. The assassins breached the building's ground floor, moving room by room. They found the building strangely empty. No guards, no gang members, nothing. It seemed too easy. Then the trap closed. Union soldiers emerged from hidden positions. Bill's gang members blocked escape routes. The Confederate assassins found themselves surrounded in the building's central courtyard. Sherman walked into the courtyard, his uniform now visible, flanked by armed soldiers. Bill the Boss stood beside him, showing the Southern agents exactly who they'd underestimated. "Gentlemen," Sherman addressed the trapped assassins, "you're now prisoners of the United States Army. Drop your weapons, or we'll drop you." The lead assassin, a man with a thick Southern accent, laughed bitterly. "A Union general working with criminal scum. Lincoln must be desperate." "Desperate enough to win," Sherman replied coldly. "Where's Colonel Harris?" The assassin spat on the ground. "You think we'll betray our commanding officer? We're Southern gentlemen, not Northern cowards." Bill the Boss stepped forward. "You're not gentlemen. You're terrorists who manipulate poor people into dying for your cause while you hide in luxury hotels. That's not honor. That's cowardice." Suddenly, gunfire erupted from outside the building. Harris had anticipated the trap and brought additional forces. His main assault had been a diversion. The real attack targeted Sherman and Bill directly. Bullets shattered windows. Union soldiers returned fire. Bill's gang members engaged Harris's men in brutal close combat throughout the building. The old brewery became a battlefield. Sherman drew his pistol, fighting alongside Bill's criminals like they were his own soldiers. In war, allies were whoever stood beside you when death approached. "Harris is trying to escape through the back," Captain Hayes shouted. "Not tonight," Sherman growled, running after the Confederate agent. Colonel Harris ran through 5 Point's narrow alleys like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Sherman and Bill pursued him, knowing this might be their only chance to capture the mastermind behind the riots. Harris was younger and faster, but he didn't know these streets. He turned down a dead-end alley, then desperately climbed a fire escape to reach rooftops. Sherman and Bill followed, refusing to let him escape. The chase led across rooftops, through tenement buildings, and down into sewers. Harris was trained but panicked. Sherman was older but relentless. Bill knew every shortcut and secret passage in 5 points. They cornered Harris in an abandoned warehouse near the docks. The Confederate agent drew his pistol, breathing heavily. "You've lost, Harris," Sherman declared. "Surrender and you'll face trial. Fight and you'll die here." Harris laughed desperately. "The Confederacy will never surrender. Even if you capture me, 10 more agents will take my place. New York will burn eventually, and the Union will fall." "Not tonight," Bill said quietly, then moved with surprising speed. He disarmed Harris with a street fighter's efficiency, breaking the Confederate's wrist with a single brutal motion. Harris screamed in pain, dropping to his knees. Sherman quickly bound him with rope while Bill kept watch for any remaining operatives. "It's over," Sherman said. "The riots end tonight. Your plot failed." By morning, New York City began returning to normal. The riots had killed over 100 people and destroyed millions in property. But the city survived, largely because of the unlikely alliance between Sherman and Bill the Boss. President Lincoln sent a personal telegram thanking Sherman for his service. However, the telegram also contained a warning. "Your methods were effective, but controversial. Working with criminals raises questions about Union integrity." Sherman met with Bill one final time in the old brewery. "Lincoln's grateful but uncomfortable with our alliance. I need to return to my command in the South. What will you do now?" Bill poured whiskey for both of them. "Continue running my empire, I suppose. Though I suspect your military friends will want me arrested now that the crisis is over." Sherman shook his head. "I made a deal with you. I keep my deals. You'll have your amnesty, your jobs, and your community improvements. I've already sent orders to that effect. And the wealthy paying commutation fees? That fight will be harder, but I'll push for it. You saved this city, Bill. That deserves recognition, even if history never officially records our alliance." Bill raised his glass. "To America's most shocking alliance, a general and a gang boss, united against treason." Sherman clinked his glass against Bill's. "May history forget this happened, but may the Union remember it worked." They drank together one last time, two men from completely different worlds who'd found common cause in defending their country. Sherman traveled to Washington to report directly to President Lincoln. The meeting occurred in the White House late at night, with only Secretary of War Edwin Stanton present. Lincoln looked exhausted. The war was grinding America to dust, and internal threats like the draft riots made everything more difficult. "General Sherman," Lincoln began, "your telegram was unusual. You partnered with a criminal organization?" Sherman stood firm. "Yes, Mr. President. Bill the Boss controls 5 points. He had information and influence I needed. Together, we stopped a Confederate plot that could have destroyed New York's ability to support the war." Stanton scoffed. "You legitimized criminals. What message does that send?" "It sends the message that we'll work with anyone who defends the Union." Sherman replied sharply. "Would you rather I failed to stop the riots because I was too proud to accept help?" Lincoln raised his hand, silencing the argument. General Sherman's methods were unorthodox, but they succeeded. The riots ended, Confederate agents were captured, New York's ports remain operational. That's what matters. "But the precedent," Stanton began, "will never be repeated." Lincoln interrupted. "This was a unique situation requiring unique solutions. General Sherman, you did well, but this alliance must remain unofficial. History cannot record that the Union government worked with gang bosses, even if it saved lives." Sherman nodded. "I understand, sir. The full details will remain classified." "Good. Now return to your command. The South awaits your particular brand of warfare." With the riots ended and Confederate agents captured, Bill the Boss emerged stronger than ever. He'd proven himself not just a criminal, but a patriot. His reputation grew throughout New York's underworld and beyond. The promised jobs materialized. Government contracts for rebuilding riot damage went to companies that hired 5 Points residents. amnesty protected Bill's men from prosecution for riot participation. Slowly, conditions improved in the neighborhood. Bill used his enhanced reputation to expand operations, but he also invested in legitimate businesses, construction companies, shipping firms, even charitable organizations. He remained a criminal, but he'd tasted respectability, and it changed him. One evening, a young Irish immigrant named Michael approached Bill's office. The boy was 16, skinny, desperate for work and purpose. "Mr. Poole," Michael stammered, "I want to work for you. I heard how you saved the city. I want to be part of something important." Bill studied the boy carefully. He saw himself at that age, angry, ambitious, looking for meaning in a world that offered none. "You think working for me makes you important?" Bill asked. "You allied with a general. You stopped a war in the streets. That's more important than anything I've ever done." Bill sighed, pouring himself whiskey. "Kid, I'm a criminal. I hurt people for money. Don't romanticize what I do. General Sherman worked with me because he had no choice, not because I'm admirable." "But you protected the city." "I protected my business," Bill corrected. "The patriotism was real, but don't forget, I'm still a gang boss. I still break laws. I still destroy lives." The captured Confederate agents, including Colonel Harris, faced military tribunals. Harris was sentenced to hang for treason, espionage, and conspiracy to commit terrorism. His execution was scheduled for September 1863. But the Confederacy didn't forget. Southern intelligence services wanted revenge for the failed operation. They blamed both Sherman and Bill the Boss for destroying their New York network. A letter arrived at the old brewery, delivered by a messenger who disappeared immediately afterward. Bill opened it carefully, suspecting a trap. Inside was a simple message written in elegant handwriting. "William Poole, you betrayed your class by serving the Union's tyranny. The Confederacy has long memories. You will pay for your treason against white civilization. Death is coming for you and your Irish vermin." Bill showed the letter to Captain Hayes, who still maintained contact as Sherman's representative in New York. "This is a serious threat," Hayes warned. "Confederate agents are relentless. They'll send more assassins." "Let them come," Bill replied. "I survived the draft riots. I can survive Southern revenge." But this threat was different. The Confederacy had learned from Harris's failure. They wouldn't attack Bill directly. Instead, they'd target what he cared about: his community, his people, his empire. Explosions rocked 5 Points over the following weeks. Buildings burned. Innocent people died. Confederate saboteurs struck randomly, unpredictably, terrorizing the neighborhood Bill had fought to protect. "They're destroying everything you built," Hayes observed after the 5th bombing. "You need to respond." Bill's expression hardened. "Get me Sherman. We need to finish what we started." Sherman received Bill's message while planning his infamous march to the sea. The general was preparing to cut a path of destruction through the Confederacy, breaking the South's will to fight. "Sir, Bill the Boss needs your help," Captain Hayes reported. "Confederate agents are terrorizing 5 Points in revenge for our alliance." Sherman studied maps of the South, considering his response. "I can't return to New York. My command is here, but I can do something better. I can remove the source of their revenge." He drafted a letter to Bill. "I cannot help you directly, but my upcoming campaign will hurt the Confederacy so badly they'll have no resources for revenge operations. Hold on. Victory is coming." Bill read the letter with grim satisfaction. Sherman was going to wage total war against the South. The Confederate leadership would be too busy defending their homeland to continue attacking New York. Meanwhile, Bill implemented his own countermeasures. He turned 5 Points into a fortress. Every building was watched, every stranger was questioned. Gang members patrolled constantly, looking for Confederate saboteurs. His network of informants expanded throughout the city. Bill offered rewards for information about Confederate agents. Soon, his intelligence network rivaled anything the Union military possessed. "Mr. Poole," one of his spies reported, "we've identified 3 Confederate safe houses in Manhattan. They're planning another bombing, this time targeting the Brooklyn Bridge construction. Bill smiled coldly. Then we'll give them a surprise they'll never forget. Bill the Boss launched his own war against Confederate agents in New York. Using intelligence gathered by his network, he struck their safe houses simultaneously, capturing or killing agents before they could escape. The operation was brutal and efficient. Bill's gang members showed no mercy to enemies who'd bombed innocent civilians. By the end of one bloody night, the Confederate presence in New York was effectively destroyed. Union authorities were horrified and impressed. Bill had accomplished in hours what they'd failed to do in weeks. "You can't just execute prisoners," a Union officer protested. "They deserved trials." Bill's expression was cold. "They forfeited trials when they started murdering innocent people. I protected my community the only way that works, by making it too costly for enemies to attack us." Captain Hayes privately supported Bill's actions but publicly had to maintain distance. The Union government couldn't officially approve of vigilante justice, even when it served Union interests. Sherman, fighting in Georgia, received reports of Bill's counterattack. He wrote in his personal journal, "Bill the Boss has proven more effective against Confederate terrorism than any military force. His methods are brutal, but necessary." In war, sometimes the unofficial warriors accomplish what official forces cannot. The Confederate High Command, already struggling against Sherman's military advances, abandoned their revenge operations in New York. They couldn't afford to waste resources attacking a target defended by both Union soldiers and a ruthless gang boss. Bill had won his war. 5 Points was safe again. Victory came with costs. Bill's alliance with Sherman made him respected but also isolated. Other gang bosses viewed his cooperation with the Union as betrayal of their class. Police departments, while grateful for his help, still wanted to arrest him for his criminal activities. Bill sat alone in his office one night, drinking whiskey and contemplating his choices. He'd saved his city and his neighborhood. But he'd also changed the fundamental nature of what he was. No longer just a criminal, but something more complex. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Captain Hayes entered, carrying a package. "From General Sherman," Hayes explained. "He's currently burning his way through Georgia. But he wanted you to have this." Bill opened the package carefully. Inside was a military medal, one Sherman had received for bravery at Shiloh. A note accompanied it. "Bill, you deserve recognition you'll never receive publicly. This medal represents courage under fire. You've earned it more than most soldiers I've commanded. Keep fighting for your people. Keep protecting your city. History may forget our alliance, but I never will. W.T. Sherman." Bill held the medal, surprised by the emotion it triggered. A Union general considered him worthy of military honor. It meant more than any criminal reputation ever could. "Thank you, Captain," Bill said quietly. Tell him the alliance was the most important thing I've ever done, even if history forgets." Hayes saluted, a gesture of respect between soldiers. "Sir, history may forget, but the people of 5 Points will remember. That's what matters." Sherman's March to the Sea became the most controversial military campaign of the Civil War. He burned cities, destroyed infrastructure, and broke the Confederacy's ability to wage war. His brutal efficiency shocked both sides. But for Bill the Boss, watching from New York, Sherman's campaign had personal meaning. Every Confederate city burned meant fewer resources for revenge operations. Every Southern railroad destroyed meant less ability to threaten Northern cities. Sherman and Bill maintained secret correspondence throughout the campaign. Letters passed between them, sharing intelligence and strategy. Bill's criminal network provided information about Confederate movements that Sherman used in planning his attacks. "Your intelligence about Confederate supply routes was accurate," Sherman wrote. "We destroyed 3 major warehouses in Savannah based on your information. The enemy is starving because a New York gang boss knows their logistics better than their own officers." Bill smiled reading that letter. The alliance continued, even across hundreds of miles. They'd become genuine partners in defeating the Confederacy. When Sherman captured Atlanta, Bill organized celebrations in 5 points. Irish immigrants who'd rioted against the draft now cheered Union victories. Bill had transformed his community from anti-war to pro-Union through leadership and loyalty. "How did you do it?" Captain Hayes asked, watching the celebrations. "These people hated the war 6 months ago. I showed them they matter," Bill explained. "I got them jobs, protected their families, and proved the Union cares about Irish immigrants. People don't fight for abstract principles. They fight for leaders who prove they're worth fighting for." April 1865. Lee surrendered at Appomattox. The Civil War was over. The Union had survived, in part because a general and a gang boss had saved New York City from Confederate destruction. Sherman returned to New York as a hero. Parades honored his victories. Crowds cheered his name. He was America's most famous general after Grant. But Sherman remembered his debt to an unlikely ally. He visited 5 Points secretly, meeting Bill the boss one final time in the old brewery. "We won," Sherman said simply. "The Union survived." "Because you were willing to work with criminals," Bill replied. "Most generals wouldn't have made that choice. Most generals lost battles because they were too proud to accept help from unlikely sources. I won because I understood that victory matters more than reputation." They shared whiskey, 2 men who'd changed history through an alliance nobody would ever acknowledge publicly. "What will you do now?" Sherman asked. "Continue building," Bill answered. 5 Points is changing. People have jobs, hope, futures. I'll protect that, even if it means remaining a criminal in the eyes of law." Sherman nodded with understanding. "And I'll continue serving the Union, even though I know the real heroes of New York's survival will never receive recognition." They shook hands one last time, knowing they'd never meet again. Their alliance had served its purpose. History would remember Sherman's military genius, but forget Bill's contribution. "General," Bill said as Sherman prepared to leave, "thank you for treating me like an equal. Most people see a criminal. You saw an American." Sherman smiled. "Bill, I saw a patriot who loved his city enough to risk everything protecting it. That's more American than most politicians I've met." Years passed. Sherman became one of America's most celebrated military leaders. His march to the sea was studied in military academies worldwide. His name entered history as a symbol of total war and Union victory.